Speaking of don't believe your lying eyes, Pete Hegseth did get into West Point. That's the lead of our next story. And this is relevant, even though he went to Princeton. Speaking of Princeton, he did get into West Point and decided in the end, after touring both and considering what his life would look like, to go to Princeton. But ProPublica, this far-left group, activist group that's tried to take down Justice Alito, Justice Thomas with smears, is now trying to take down Pete Hegseth by getting ready to report that he was lying, that he did not get into West Point. So they called West Point to say, did Pete Hegseth get into West Point? And West Point allegedly told them not once, but twice, no, he didn't get in here. He didn't apply here. We have no record of Pete Hegseth ever applying to West Point. So then they go to Pete Hegseth's lawyer, Tim Parlatore, and they say, we're going to print that he lied. You have 1 hour to respond, which is ridiculous. As if this is like national security and they had to rush to print with it, Hugh, right? They had 60 minutes and he had to get back to baloney. So instead, what happened was Pete Hegseth went on Twitter, on X, and posted his acceptance letter. He didn't deal with ProPublica. He dealt with us and said, take a look at this. Here's my acceptance letter from West Point. And now ProPublica is trying to defend itself by saying, hello, this is how journalism works. When you posted that, we stood down from the story. So calm down, Pete Hegseth. And to this series of events, you say what?
I say, number one, I wish I had a recording of the editorial meeting when they decided to do the story, because they're stupid. If you get into Princeton, you will have certainly gotten into West Point, and especially if you're a fit young man like Pete Hegseth. So it's presumably true. But you know what else corroborates that? Is that after he's done with Princeton, he goes into the military and goes into combat and is deployed twice to a combat area. So there's no reason to doubt that he was interested in the military, and there's no reason to doubt that he was qualified to get into West Point. So what kind of editorial predicate did they have other than he's the most wounded nominee, let's try and bring him down. He's the weakest member of the herd right now. He's no longer. They've made him stronger. We're a left-wing hit group. The best thing to come out of this, actually, it's two-part. One, the mask is off ProPublica. They've done some good work in the past that I've actually used on my show, usually having to do with international stories. But they've done horrible stuff in the last 6 months on the Supreme Court. And then, no sooner do they catch flack that Josh Gerstein over at Politico, another lefty, come to their aid. So they're circling the wagons around an exposed left-wing hit mob. And I just love that it's happening. They come, and I posted on X, had 300,000 views. People are getting to know ProPublica out of this. And I think it may have secured Pete Hegseth's confirmation. Although on yesterday's program, you were talking to Josh Holmes and the gang from Ruthless, the four horsemen of the apocalypse from Ruthless. They were not certain about Pete getting through, because hearings are hearings. And I remember the Clarence Thomas hearings, the Brett Kavanaugh hearings. They've come up with people we haven't heard of yet, right? Just random XYZ people. And you're not going to have the chance to do what you did with your colleague from the Daily Mail, where you sit down with Pete Hegseth. It's going to happen in 72 hours. And he just got to go in Ollie North style. I don't think he can wear the uniform anymore. I don't think he's in the reserves. But he's just got to go in and hammer every allegation.
Mm-hmm. Right. Be merciless on it. And then let's see those Republicans look at Trump and all of his supporters and say, we reject him, that we're gonna stop him based on whatever comes out at that hearing. I mean, we'll see whether it's new evidence, when they actually produce somebody on the record to accuse Pete of the things that have been alleged only anonymously thus far. I look forward to seeing some former Fox News employee get up there and say, oh, he was drunk. Okay, sure. You know what? I'll testify at the hearings. I spent 10 years working with Pete. He was never drunk, and I saw him in the prime time when you would be. Anyway, so that's Pete. I will say I think their hesitancy is based on Joni Ernst, because I think we all think we're going to lose Murkowski, Collins, and maybe McConnell. Maybe not. I don't know. Well, maybe. But he doesn't like Trump at all, vice versa. So she's the one. And I know she's saying things that are closer to a maybe, but you know as well as I do, Stu, why do I keep calling you Stu? Hugh is a very talented lawyer now who went to Harvard and University of Michigan at law school and worked in the Reagan administration. She's being careful with her words. She says, while I support Pete through this process, what I think he deserves is a hearing. That's just a buying time phrase. That's not a promise of support. Now, what I am hearing, Hugh, is that she doesn't like him.
Well, you're never in the room. I actually don't think we're going to lose Senator Collins. I think Senator Collins is very serious on defense. She's chairwoman of incoming appropriations. I think if he tells her, I will pay attention to your line items and we will fully fund it, not necessarily going to lose Murkowski either. They need those Air Force bases up there. They just moved a bunch of C-130s up to Alaska. I don't know about Leader McConnell. I doubt that too. Because again, DOD is so big. If you shoot to kill the SecDef, you better win. And everyone's got a lot to lose. And by the way, you don't know who's coming after that. And so Pete is well known. And I find it interesting that both you and another former Fox colleague, Geraldo Rivera, who have no obligation to come to the defense of Pete Hegseth, have both stepped up to do so. That's very revealing. I don't know Pete except by interviews like this, and I've read his books, and I've talked to him a few times in the hallway or on a set, but I don't know him. You and Geraldo know him. You have no obligation to defend him. You both have defended him. That tells me a lot. Yeah.
I mean, I said to the audience, don't marry Pete, but I would take him as my SecDef. And so it's basically my words of wisdom for the audience.
I think spouses know each other pretty well, but other than spouses, people who work in a network and who do shows together know each other very well. You know, whether you're on time, whether you're late, whether you dress well, whether you don't dress well, you know everything about boyfriends, girlfriends, husbands, wives, children. You just spend a lot of time with your colleagues, which is why when you and Geraldo say Major Pete is great, I listen.
Yeah. I mean, I spent a lot of time with Pete Hegseth, and all I ever saw was a professional, smart, earnest, great guy who cared deeply about the military. It's all he wanted to talk about, ever. I mean, even when you're making casual conversation, that's what he wanted to talk about, the military and what he could do to address their concerns and how their needs weren't being met, truly, even in casual conversation. And I've said this to my audience before. We did have conversations many times at Fox News about whose drinking was getting out of control or who was potentially taking drugs, and some we knew were. And those people were definitely on the radar. We all knew. He was never one of the names. Pete was on the radar for loving the military and veterans, and yes, for being a little randy, I guess we can say, when it came to the women. Whatever, that was between him and his wives.
Did you use the word tomcatting? Did you use the word tomcatting?
It was Rich Lowry. Isn't he cute?
Yeah, somebody used tomcatting. I like that. Let me ask you about the people who could really rat out Pete, makeup artists. I don't know how Fox does it, but PBS,
they loved him.
With Pete,
my former makeup artist at Fox, who is there all the time, has been texting me about him nonstop. Like, she's in his camp. She knows. You're exactly right. They know where all the bodies are buried.
And their opinions count a lot.
Yeah.
They know people.
And one posted on Instagram in support of him as well. So, I mean, he's good there. I wanted to pick up on what you said about the political reporter, Josh Gerstein. So he gives you a hard time. You responded to the ProPublica attempted attack on Pete by saying this story is and remains that a bureaucrat at West Point misled you and you did not print that. That's not journalism. Then Politico inserts itself into your spat with ProPublica. Josh Gerstein, the reporter, saying, Hugh, are you really saying we should do a story every time what a government spokesperson tells us turns out not to be right? I mean, it would take up perhaps half of my time. And then you responded. But do you want to walk us through why a response to that? They're saying, look, they checked it out. It didn't check out. They moved on.
Josh's argument is a straw man. And it stands out. In a city full of battalions of straw men, Josh's argument stands out as the straw man because it is not responsive to, number one, why did they begin the inquiry when he was a Princeton guy and he did go in the military? Number two, why didn't they tell us that West Point had misled them, which is itself rather significant since he's going to be the Secretary of Defense? And if the answer is because they have bad bookkeeping, then you just put it in. It's a one paragraph thing. We got a tip, or we were concerned that he didn't get into West Point. We investigated it. It turns out that West Point was wrong. So we ought to now worry about West Point record keeping. Tom Cotton has sent a letter over to West Point. He wants answers. My guess is it's innocent error by an incompetent bureaucrat. But until we know that it's a story, what we know is that ProPublica did not do it. Now, part two, Josh Gerstein. How is he connected to ProPublica? Josh Gerstein broke the Dobbs leak, remember? And
right.
He has been a critic of Thomas and Alito and their ethics the whole time. So he and ProPublica are washing each other's hands. They share a point of view about the court. So they're circling the wagons. Left-wing journos are circling the wagons around left-wing journos. And he got hammered in the comments because everyone said, yeah, that's actually not journalism. You should say that you were misled by West Point and that was unfortunate and that you were hot washing the story. And that's what I hate, that when you have an hour to respond. That's hot washing the story.
Absolutely
and
right.
Thank goodness he had good files.
You don't do that. You don't do that where you only have an hour to respond unless there's a reason for it. You know, like, we have got to get this story. It's breaking, it's big, and national security, whatever. There are reasons why you might have to. If it came to you late, you didn't have time to go to the source, whatever. But this is not one of them, some evergreen piece on whether Pete did or did not get into West Point. They were just trying to sandbag the guy. You know, one of the possibilities, and you mentioned it, on why they wouldn't even do just a one paragrapher on it, is somebody at West Point was the initial source. Somebody, you think of West Point as being, they're military, whatever. That doesn't mean they're pro-Pete or pro-Trump. And if somebody at West Point, if the call was incoming to ProPublica and in an attempted smear that they were about to print and didn't because Pete had the records that West Point claimed it didn't have, that'd be a reason why you wouldn't say it.
It's interesting. I hadn't considered that their tip had come from within the academy. As you probably know, the academy is under an intense amount of focus for having become woke. And not one of them, but all three of them are under an intense amount of focus about what are you teaching our future warriors? Are they doing more social justice warrioring than they are actually lethality warrioring? And I have no opinion on that because I'm a civilian. But I know we should look into it, and the people who are veterans in the cause, Cotton, Dan Sullivan, Michael Waltz, they are drilled down on this, and they're not going to let it go. The best result for West Point is that ProPublica called us up. They called a file clerk. The file clerk got it wrong. He looked in the wrong place, and we came up with the right answer, and we immediately called him back. That's the only best case scenario for West Point. If they initiated the story, if someone decided, I don't like Pete Hegseth, and I'm gonna blow the whistle on a claim that I heard him make once on West Point, because I don't see it in my data file, that's a bigger story. Either way, ProPublica did not do its readers justice, and Josh Gerstein and the gang that are defending them are just tipping their hands at the fact that they're activists. They're actually journalists, but they're advocate journalists, activist journalists. And that's what I am, but I'm transparent about it.
For those of us who have been holding our breath for the past several months, waiting for this election, we can finally exhale. Work can now be done on the major issues this country's facing, one of the most significant being our national debt. The fact is our nation's broke, and that debt is a house of cards that cannot be quickly dismantled. So the strategy for you probably remains the same when it comes to your investments. You might want to diversify your savings. This is why I want to tell you about Birch Gold. So many things are out of our control, out of our president's control, so it can be important to have a safe haven for your savings. Birch Gold Group can help you convert an IRA or 401k into an IRA in physical gold. And the best news is it does not cost you 1 cent out of pocket. Text MK to 989898 to get your free info kit on gold. Plus, right now you will receive a free 1-ounce silver eagle for every $5,000 purchased. Protect your savings with Birch Gold and text MK to 989898 to claim your eligibility for free silver today. Thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.